Chocolate! Chocolate! Chocolate!
Hello everybody, Chocolate Guy here, and welcome back to another countdown. I'm gonna do this video in the same format I did the top 10 best SpongeBob episodes list, but with no videos of myself, so I can use more images on individual slides. And that was all kind of weird to edit together. Anyways, this is a special video. This video not only marks the end of my second full year of making YouTube content, but also it's gonna be my last Simpsons video for a while at least, as I have many other shows I want to talk about, and I completed my main goal of making the best lists for each of the first 8 seasons. And while I want to make a worse list for those seasons eventually and talk about episodes from season 9 onwards, neither of these things are gonna happen anytime soon. So this is it for now. This list is a big moment for me because The Simpsons has been a big part of my channel these past 2 years or so, and my first ever video was a Simpsons one. And now, after all the Simpsons lists on the first 8 classic seasons, we end that series off comparing the very best, to figure out what my favorite episode of not just those seasons, but the entire show is. So that's what I'm gonna do here. To set this video up though, for people who haven't seen my other Simpsons videos or are unfamiliar with me, I'll give a quick overview on my thoughts of the first 8 seasons of The Simpsons. As I've said, they're amazing and some of the best television of all time. They perfectly combine great characters, interesting stories, and themes with amazing comedy. When it's great, there's nothing else quite like it, and so many shows, including The Simpsons itself, later on have tried to replicate that magic of blending all these elements together with varying success, but none of them do it as well as The Simpsons does it here. While season 1 is decent and very rough around the edges, it still has its strong moments. But starting with season 2, every season after is great, and the show for the most part keeps topping itself and getting better until season 9. That's why I didn't end up doing worse lists for most of the early seasons, because there were so few bad episodes, and why making the best lists at points were really difficult because there were a lot of great episodes to choose from, even though sometimes the best ones really did stick out pretty easily. I'm gonna put a ranking in the description of the first 8 seasons because I've never given a formal one and don't have enough new to say to make a video on it. I'll talk a bit more about what I think of individual seasons as we get into the list, but the part of that ranking that I think is the most important to bring up is that season 6 is my favorite, with season 7 being a close second, because I really love when the show gets more story and character development heavy, which these 2 seasons do really well. The reason I bring this up is because if I did a traditional top 10 list, majority of the best episodes would be from my favorite seasons, and no episodes from some of the lower seasons on that ranking would probably make the cut. But I want to compare the best from each season. I think that's the most interesting. So I came up with an idea that for this top 10, I'm gonna rank every episode I consider to be the best from the first 8 seasons. And then number 10 and 9 will be the best episodes I consider to be the second best of any season. At the end, there will be 6 honorable mentions, which will be the other 6 second best episodes from each season from 1 through 8 that just didn't make the cut. I know a lot of you were expecting a more formal top 10 list, which I may make one day, but I think this will be more interesting and allow me to see where each season's best and second best stack up against each other. Last thing I need to mention is I will be ranking the episodes I currently consider to be the best or second best of a given season, not necessarily the episode I put at that spot on my previous Simpsons lists. My opinions have changed in some ways, so even if you've watched all my videos, you may be surprised with what ended up here. Anyways, with all that said, let's finally talk about the best The Simpsons has to offer. Here is my list of the top 10 best Simpsons seasons 1 through 8 episodes. So this episode actually wasn't gonna make the list, as it was just edged out in the original draft by another episode I consider to be my second favorite of a season. But I changed my mind on something, and that episode ended up becoming my favorite episode of one of the seasons, moving it up the list and allowing Marge Not Be Proud to make its way in. And I couldn't be happier to talk about this episode again. It is truly an amazing one, and just because it barely made the list doesn't mean it's not one of the best of the show. This episode looks at the Bart and Marge dynamic, which is one of the most interesting of the show, in a way that no other episode does. This episode also uses the fact that it's set around Christmas time perfectly, to not only set up the story, but also have a chunk of it set in the try and save. And through this, you get great atmosphere and jokes, like the Don Brodka stuff and all the other really awkward and observational humor. But the biggest strength of this episode is its sugary sweet center, that being the Marge and Bart stuff. You really get to see how not only they view each other, but how much they deeply care for each other. And through this conflict, it really challenges both of their views on one another in such an interesting way, through so many awkward but character-defining moments between the two. I actually think what makes this work so well, and something I didn't mention in my review of the episode, is that this episode tells the story pretty much completely from Bart's perspective, which was such a good choice, because it allows us to really feel how distant Marge is being from him, while also making certain things Marge does that maybe weren't intended to hurt Bart feel that way, because Bart controls the story, he controls the narrative, because we see everything through his eyes, making it all the more interesting, and the kid perspective we get from Bart makes the story feel all the more grander, making these moments between Bart and Marge, and especially that heartwarming ending, really land. We definitely get Marge's perspective completing the story, but we use her a little more sparingly, and the story being from Bart's perspective really gives the episode that extra charm of being a kid around Christmas time and kind of flipping that on its head while exploring his relationship with his mother. Sure, some people might say this episode is too cheesy, but the episode goes so far with its story and making its emotions it tries to convey feel so real that it doesn't even matter and gets me every time. I love when The Simpsons do these really character-driven stories that are super moving, and I don't care how cheesy it is. This is one of the best ones. This not only is a fantastic episode, but it's also an amazing Christmas episode too. So much so that I watched it twice this year. Once by myself, and once with my mom who hadn't seen it, and she also really liked it. If I did a more traditional list and not done more of a ranking video, this episode would be higher. The reason it's not my favorite episode out of all the ones I called second best of any given season, though, is because the next one actually hits me a bit harder emotionally, and I connect with it more, but this is still a masterpiece, and a great way to start this list. So Bart Gets an F being the best episode to not top any of my Simpsons lists was not something that surprised me a ton, but I still didn't think it would happen. But after rewatching all these episodes, it made a lot of sense. Bart Gets an F is the first episode of when The Simpsons became one of the best shows of all time, and it's still one of the show's best. If I did a traditional list, this would be in the top 3. Easy. It's just that good. Unlike the last episode, I honestly don't have a ton new to say, for the season 2 video being one of my oldest ones. I think I said pretty much everything I wanted to say there. The only new thing is that I think I like this episode even more now, and I already liked it a lot then. It's just a great episode that shows Bart's struggle with school and all the aspects of his life that work against him and how he deals with that, and when the stakes in his world are raised, what he tries to do to get a passing test score so he won't have to repeat the 4th grade. And after all his hard work and determination, it pays off. Only after one of the most hard-hitting scenes in the entire show. This story is just so relatable, and it makes you care so much about Bart and his struggles, and makes you so engaged with the story because of how far they go to show Bart's struggle with school, and how much he goes through just to succeed. So many different things happen, leading to so many interesting scenes that make you care for Bart even more. And the ending, when he passes that test, feels so earned, especially after that final scene, which, as I said, is one of the most powerful of the show. I'm already starting to repeat myself from my review, so I'll end the entry with this. This episode is really just one of the most interesting, relatable, and rewarding episodes of the series, and shows off something as relatable as struggling in school in a way I haven't seen any other show do, that makes Bart nearly the most interesting and relatable he has ever been in the process. It sets a gold standard the other episodes tried to achieve moving forward, and is still one of the show's best for this reason. But there's a better episode from season 2, so it didn't crack the top 8. Speaking of... So, talking about this episode again is a little weird. I praised this episode in my first ever video, and for the most part, I agree with what I said there. And am kinda surprised by how well I talked about every aspect of the episode, and how much my opinion for the most part still holds up. But I will say, I think I kind of oversold this one. Don't get me wrong, I still love this episode. It's a personal favorite of mine, and still shines above the rest of season 1. But it's suffering from some season 1-isms does make it worse than the best episodes of other seasons. I just don't think this story is as fleshed out or introspective as I felt it was at the time. And the scene with Bleeding Gums Murphy has shrunk on me a bit, as I don't think it's as interesting or as meaningful as I made it out to be when I made my season 1 video. I still think it's a great scene that Lisa does learn something from that helps her deal with her issues, and it's cool that Bleeding Gums Murphy treats her with respect and not like a dumb kid. Their conversation is just really fun and interesting for this reason. But I feel like through this scene, we don't look at Lisa's issues in as much depth as we should, and the scene doesn't amount to as much of a change for Lisa as I think the episode tries to portray it as. I still love the scene, and their conversation and song together are my favorite moments of season 1. But it is held back from not being the most fleshed out. And that is kind of the one issue with this episode. And while it is a minor one, and I still think this episode is great, and it doesn't bring down the episode too much, especially compared to the rest of the episodes in season 1, which suffer from this and many other issues in a much worse fashion, it still keeps this episode from being as strong as some of its competitors. While I love the story and think this is still a great character study for Lisa early on, showing how interesting she can be in a way I really relate to, probably even more than Bart Gets an F, and that's an episode I just praised a couple minutes ago for being just super relatable, and the story here really shows how she overcomes her mental health struggle through Bleeding Gums Murphy and her mother's support in a really interesting way. And while I still think the awkwardness and rawness that season 1 provides does really benefit it, some stuff being underdeveloped due to the writing in season 1 being kind of weird due to them still trying to find their footing on that end, does hold the episode back. And while it's funny, it really can't compare on that end either to the episodes higher on this list. But as I said, I still really love this episode, as most of what I said in my review still stands, and will always have an appreciation for it, for how much it does connect with me, and how strong of a showing it was early on in the show. And I think the episode does a better job showing how much both parents care for Lisa than I think I actually gave it credit for in that original review, as we do get a few really good scenes earlier in the episode with Homer showing he cares. The relationship just isn't really fleshed out yet, but those scenes are cool, and it's stuff like that which really makes this one stand out, but its small issues do keep it from being any higher. This is without a shadow of a doubt one of the funniest episodes of the show. I don't know if it's the funniest, and calling it one of the funniest of any show was probably a bit much last time, but there is no part of this episode that does not work comedically. And for a comedy show like The Simpsons, this episode is a shining example of what the show can do. What can I even say about this episode that hasn't already been said a million times by different people, including me? It's just an episode that has such a funny premise and uses every aspect of the story to tell joke after joke, and they're all amazing. I have no connection to baseball and don't know who half these players are, and the story means nothing, but neither of these things matter as I was laughing at every joke the entire way through. The reason it's not any higher is because I don't know if I could quite call this the funniest episode, and there are other episodes that try to achieve bigger things that I do enjoy watching more. This will never be one of my personal top 5 favorite or anything, because I am more preferable to episodes that are a bit more character driven, as I said, but it's still one of the funniest and strongest of season 3, with really no issues holding it back. I just prefer the next 6 episodes on this list more. Oh man, this is the episode I struggled placing the most, because on the one hand, it's one of the most interesting and unique episodes of the show, and is considered to be one of, if not the best, by some, for how it breaks down Homer's character and the tropes surrounding his personality and how he fits in the show, through Frank Grimes, who feels like a real person giving a genuine reaction to Homer, and how nonsensical and idiotic not only he is, but his life is. And it's so interesting because it feels like the episode is a war between Grimes and the Simpsons writers, and really plays with your perception on how you like your main characters in a show to be, and what you want out of an episode of a TV show, because even though Grimes is so sympathetic and all the points he makes are true, as I said in my original review, he just isn't likable. And you still find yourself kind of siding with Homer, or at least not being against him when you feel like you should be. It's so weird and interesting to see these two characters' relationship with each other in this way with this context. But it's also so funny to boot, especially that dark ending, where you don't know how to feel about it, but are still laughing a ton. even if you probably shouldn't be. But with all that said, this is still an episode I think I respect more than like. Look, I love it a lot, even with that, and it's definitely my favorite from the 8th season, which is one of my favorites on rewatch, but after going through all the candidates for this list, there were just 5 other episodes I enjoyed watching more, whether I thought they were funnier or did something that interested me more, to make it a better episode in my eyes. But even though it didn't crack the top 5, this is still one of the show's most creative episodes, and a really damn strong one. I completely understand why this might be someone's favorite, but competition was very strong. Last Exit to Springfield is another one of the funniest episodes of the show, and is another one some people consider to be the best, and for good reason, even if I don't think it's quite that great. It does rival and maybe even beats out Homer at the Bat on the comedy front, even though I'm not quite sure if it's better on that end. But what lands it higher on the list is that this episode manages to have real stakes and an engaging story while having it be built on the most nonsensical idea and have our main character not really face any actual challenges, which could be an issue if the story took itself super seriously, but it doesn't, which leads to an episode you get really engaged in because they do enough to make you care for Homer's quote-unquote struggle, but the episode shows the struggle off in the most comedic way possible, with the scenes of him and Mr. Burns and him leading the strike effort. It's just a simple story with great stakes and amazing jokes. How Mr. Burns thinks Homer is this master negotiator just for that ending scene where Homer looks into getting everything he wants kills me. And there's so many other scenes like that throughout the episode. This episode may not be as interesting or unique as something like Homer's Enemy, or even as overall funny as Homer at the Bat, but it is close. And the fact that this episode manages to balance great stakes that make you really care for our main character while telling a pretty simple and nonsensical story to tell the best jokes ever is so impressive, and makes the episode one of the most enjoyable watches, putting it above the 2 episodes I just mentioned. But there are a few episodes that I still enjoy watching even more, which is why it's only number 5. But damn, this top 5 was super close in quality, and separating them was very difficult. So the fact that it's only number 5 is not a knock on this episode at all. Out of every episode I rewatched for this list, there was no other I appreciated more this time around than Cape Fear. That doesn't mean I enjoyed watching it the most, or that it's my favorite, but I forgot just how amazing it was, and having a blast the entire time through. I had so much fun that right after I rewatched it, I did consider it for the number 1 spot, because it's just so ridiculously fun and funny. But after taking a step back, I realized there were 3 I just like a little bit more for various reasons. But that doesn't change the fact that this is a masterpiece of television. I'm just gonna say it, I think this might be the funniest episode of the show. And while I could never say that for certain, because comparing the funniest episodes of the show is really difficult, this episode has made me laugh the most out of any Simpsons episode consistently each time I watch it. It just has the best, most quotable, and most iconic set of jokes, even compared to Homer at the Bat in Last Exit to Springfield, and other episodes considered to be the funniest, like You Only Move Twice and Marge vs. the Monorail. But that's not all, because there's legitimate tension through all this comedy that really works in this story. Sideshow Bob at points feels like a real threat here, and the scene where he corners Bart legitimately had me on the edge of my seat, but the episode also isn't afraid to make him so comedic and lame at points. They really do get the best of both worlds here, and Bob has so many iconic moments for both reasons. The way this episode manages to be really tense, but also super funny at the same time is super impressive. But it also has you just so immersed in the episode for this reason, because you never know exactly what the episode will throw at you next. And that makes this one of the most impressive episodes of the show, and a very creative and enjoyable watch. One moment, you can be on the edge of your seat because Bob has Bart cornered on the boat, and the next moment, you'll be laughing hysterically at Bob's performance. This episode is just a trip, and there's nothing else in the show quite like it, with how it makes you so on edge and nervous for Bart at points, while having the best set of jokes of the show, and neither element subtracts from each other, and actually adds to such a great experience, which I think is even more impressive and enjoyable than Last Exit to Springfield. Top it all off with this being the best Sideshow Bob appearance, and Kelsey Grammer giving one of the best Simpsons guest star performances, and the atmosphere and animation in this episode also being some of the best the show has to offer, really elevating some already exceptional scenes to another level, and you have an easy highlight from this show. The more I talk about this, the more I want to put it at least a little higher, but as I said, this top 5 was very close, and really made me have to choose what I valued most in a Simpsons episode. And in the end, this amazing one was beaten out by 3 episodes that really dive deep into their characters of choosing, they focus on, and the issues they are struggling with, leading to me enjoying watching them just a little bit more, which is also why I prefer Bart Gets an F over this one as well. But man, is this one a classic, and one of the best that the show has to offer. But we still have 3 more to go. So this is the first ever change I've publicly made about a list I've created. Round Springfield is no longer my favorite episode, or even in my top 2 of Season 6. At the time I made my Season 6 list, I very strongly felt that it was the best episode of the season, and was a weird hot take I had at the time. But on rewatch, I gotta say, it shrunk on me a lot. And I don't quite know what I was thinking, giving it the title of Best Episode of Season 6. Even if I agree with an amount of the points I made, it's just not that good or better than some of its competition. There's many reasons that episode has shrunk on me, but that's a discussion for another day. What we're here to talk about is how wrong I was to not give Maggie Makes 3 the full recognition it deserves by calling it the best episode of the 6th season, and to discuss why I think it's one of the best episodes of the show. The way the episode looks at Homer's blue-collar roots, through him escaping his horrible manual labor job he works at, to work at a job he loves at a bowling alley, is really endearing, which makes it so heartbreaking, but really interesting to watch when he has to give it all up to go back to the power plant so he can afford to have another kid. This is my favorite depiction of Homer ever. The characterization around him is so interesting, but also so relatable because most people can connect with this story in some way, and I don't think he ever gets quite this interesting again. Also, the fact that he controls the narrative not only allows for some really clever joke usage, even if it isn't the funniest episode of all time, it still has some incredibly strong ones, making the episode great on that end. But Homer's perspective also makes the more hard-hitting moments just feel so personal. The scene where he walks back to the plant after quitting his job at the bowling alley is one of the best of the show because of how much you feel Homer's pain of having to do this, and the fact that the episode can pick itself right up after that and have such a sweet, rewarding ending that not only fits with the rest of the episode, but is the best part, is pretty remarkable. Because after this great episode that looks at Homer's character in such an interesting way and really shows how happy he could be if he didn't have to work at the power plant just for this accidental pregnancy to make him have to go back there and give up his happy life, the do it for her ending really works because Maggie is what makes it all worth it. And it's just so inspiring for Homer to take this really crummy situation that at first he views this accidental pregnancy as nothing but a negative, but then realizes that this baby, this innocent child that he has the responsibility to raise, is what makes it worth going through these challenges. And it's just really powerful. It truly is one of the most powerful moments in the show and really hits me hard. I don't even know what else to say. This is such a great one. Every bit of praise I've ever said about the episode holds true and much more, and it's only grown on me with time. And I was a fool to not give it that full recognition it deserved last time by calling it the best episode of season 6, for how powerful of a watch it is, and being the best flashback episode for sure. But there are still 2 episodes that just barely topped it. This is the episode I connect with the most in the show for me. Dealing with social anxiety is an issue that many can connect to, and this episode is not only just the best representation of what it feels like to suffer from social anxiety, but it also gives great advice on how to deal with it. Lisa is my favorite character of the show, and this is one of her most interesting episodes. Her quest to make friends and deal with her social anxiety is such an endearing one, and the entire episode just slowly develops her character as she goes on this vacation and makes new friends while dealing with this. That really is all the episode's about. There are some twists and turns, and there's some funny family stuff with the rest of the family, and Milhouse who gets tagged along, which is really funny, but the episode for the most part just follows Lisa as she tries to rebrand her image after struggling to make friends back home and actually make some here on this summer vacation. And this simple plot is one of the most engaging of the show. You get so into Lisa's story here, and the episode just has so much to say about her struggle with social anxiety and how her work to appeal to other people while learning to still stay true to herself really pays off, as she doesn't think her friends want to keep being friends with her when they learn more about her past, but they actually appreciate her just being a great person no matter who she was. This is one of the best episodes of the entire show for how it looks at an interesting character through a cool, relatable lens, but I think it's better than some of the previous episodes I've mentioned because it goes even further than those episodes at showing its character off in an interesting way, and it hits me the hardest because of stuff in my own life. This is just a super meaningful episode, and as I said in my review, I just love every choice the episode makes, which also leads to great atmosphere and comedy, but how it looks at Lisa and her social anxiety in such depth through a more simple story is what makes this so close to being the best episode of The Simpsons. But for how amazing this episode is, there was still one that is better. And you all know what it is, so let's get into it. What's better than a great Lisa episode that looks at her struggles with social anxiety? I'll tell you what, an episode that perfectly breaks down Lisa's character in the most interesting way possible, and her relationship with her father at the same time, through the best one-off character in the show. I know this may have been predictable to many of you, as I called it my favorite all the way back when I originally reviewed it, and while I thought Summer of 4'2" stood a real chance, after rewatching all these episodes, while it was close, this is the best episode of the show by far, in my opinion. The way it perfectly breaks down who Lisa is and how her family members, but specifically her dad, impact her life is crazy how well done it is. Lisa is so bright and has the whole world ahead of her, but doesn't connect with her father, who is slow and doesn't get or care about half of what she talks about. And while this is a really interesting dynamic, what makes this the most interesting is Mr. Bergstrom's inclusion, who, as I said, is one of the best one-off characters, and Dustin Hoffman's performance is amazing. This sensitive substitute teacher who really cares about and understands what Lisa is going through and gives her not only everything she would want out of a teacher, but out of a father figure as well, is so interesting. And their dynamic is really unique because his importance and true significance to Lisa is not only used to indirectly, but directly in the scene at the museum contrast her relationship with her father in a really cool way that shows more in depth the holes in Lisa and Homer's relationship. And Mr. Bergstrom's significance to her is also masked by her crush-like feelings towards him for just being a really cool and charming person. And this is something I didn't really mention in my review, but it's a cool touch that they don't go super overboard with. It's just a way to show her fondness for him in contrast with her feelings towards her dad, and puts into perspective that for how intelligent Lisa is, she is still a child, dealing with things a lot of children go through, just in a slightly different way due to her intelligence, which makes both of the relationships with the two men in her life all the more interesting. And her affection towards Mr. Bergstrom is also used to make the ending train scene all the more powerful, because she realizes then how much he really means to her, but he still has to leave due to his profession. This is just the best scene of the show for how heartbreaking it is that this person who was so good to Lisa and meant so much to her has to leave her life, but so uplifting because of that note. It's just so powerful and moving and leads into that final scene, which, as I've said, is another one of the best in the show, that really completes the episode and shows how much Homer does care and how much he does try to make her happy and give her a good life, and how he does appreciate her intelligence. There is just no other episode in the show that looks at its characters in as interesting of a way and says such complex things about all of them. It's truly the best episode of the show, and while not the funniest, is definitely the most funny of season 2, with the Bart stuff, which also plays into Homer's distance from Lisa more, and many other great jokes. I said all I've ever wanted to say about this episode. It's a perfect masterpiece, and the episode that I just get the most out of watching for how powerful it is, and its incredible moments near the end that mean so much. And that is what makes it the best episode of The Simpsons Seasons 1 through 8. My honorable mentions or rankings for all the episodes that landed at number 2 on different lists that just missed out on this one, we have Radio Bart at 16, I Love Lisa at 15, Life on the Fast Lane at 14, The Last Temptation of Homer at 13, You Only Move Twice at 12, and my new second favorite episode of season 6, Treehouse of Horror 5, as our bubble episode at number 11. And with that, thank you guys so much for watching. Like last year, I'm gonna skip my normal outro to just say thanks to everyone for supporting me, not only this past year, but the past couple. This was a big year of growth for my channel, getting over 100 subscribers and a lot more views, especially on a few particular videos. And I can't thank you guys enough for that, and also sticking with me even through some dry spots where there wasn't a ton of content. It wasn't as bad as last year, but I'm hoping to not have that issue as much in 2023. I love making videos, and I'm hoping to make so many more in the future and growing my subscriber base even more, now that I'm not super busy. So on that note, here are just some updates for the new year. I'm going off to college in around 8 months, but until then, my schedule isn't super crazy, So I'm gonna use that time to try and upload one big video a month and maybe one or more smaller ones. For some more specific plans, I want to finish my Avatar lists, post the Spongebob Season 5 video next year, and continue the Ben 10 list series before I go off to college in September, along with hopefully posting some other lists on some other shows I want to talk about. The one show I didn't mention was Hey Arnold, and that's because I have a big announcement. The worst list for the first 3 seasons isn't coming. After trying to figure out a way to make that video for a long time, I realized I don't have a ton of interest because there aren't a ton of bad episodes, and comparing them was really difficult and just not that fun or interesting. But to compensate for that, before I post my Season 4 list, which should come out sometime next year, I'm gonna rewatch the first 3 seasons and give individual episode reviews to episodes I want to talk about, including some I consider to be the worst from those 3 seasons. So you will know what my least favorites are from those seasons before I post my Season 4 list. That will be where my individual episode reviews will be focused on in the next couple of months or so. So I hope you look forward to that. And I apologize for not posting any more individual episode reviews in December, as I had an idea that fell apart, and I also got consumed with working on the 2 other big list videos that month, but more will come soon. And those are most of the plans I have for 2023. And I will try to make them happen, but obviously with my track record, no promises, as there was some things I planned last year that didn't happen, and I'm sorry for that, but I'm excited to try and complete these ideas I have. And while I have a few other ideas, including my next list that I hope to release in January on a show I haven't talked about before, but I want to keep all that a surprise for now. But with all that said, once again, thank you all for your support this past year, and I'm excited to make even more videos in the next one. Happy New Year's, everybody!